I'm Steve Murphy, and welcome to the Insider Exclusive. Today's show is a special tribute to William L. Britt and the tragedy he suffered in the halls of UCLA Injustice. Stay tuned. This is a show that is a great tragedy. It's a tribute to a young man, William L. Britt. His father is here. His father is Don Britt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve.
There's two things we're going to discuss in this program. We'll discuss what happened with your son, and then later on we're going to have your son's attorney, Bill Ginsburg, in here talking about some of the problems and the issues and the obstacles that happened. But just relate to us about your son, Will. What happened?
Well, you might say the official record is that April 28th of 2005, he was killed in an automobile accident. Mm-hmm. I received word of it from when a coroner's office came to my house about 11 o'clock at night and informed me that he'd been killed.
He was driving his car?
He was driving a car, and he was by himself, and he was returning to Stockton. He was at that time a student at the University of Pacific. Mm-hmm. When I was able to come to my senses, the first question, and virtually the only line of questioning that the officer pursued with me, was whether or not my son had been under what he called unusual stress recently. And I responded yes. And the accident will go down as a single vehicle accident where the driver lost control of the car and struck the back of a semi, causing it to go off the road and causing his death. But that's not the whole story of what took place. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to explain the reality of what really caused my son's death. And initially, he started his college career at UC Santa Cruz and was very happy there, adjusted to college life well. Will had a lot of friends. When Will was at Santa Cruz, there was an incident where they had been invited to a party at a private residence. The party was crashed by some, I guess I would call them wannabe gang members, who ultimately used baseball bats on some of the people and some of the vehicles. But in any event, Will and a couple of his friends were accosted. Will was involved in defending one of his friends. And ultimately, the police became involved. Several arrests were made. And there was great concern about retaliation because of the gang affiliation.
He had testified.
And well, the question was whether he and the two of his classmates would make the identifications to put the perpetrators away, and the boys were willing to do that. So the decision was made for the security of both the boys, the three boys, and the university was to transfer them. One young man went to Santa Barbara, and Will and a friend of his went to UCLA.
Yeah. Was this a university decision, or was it a joint decision between you, your family,
It was a
and the university?
joint decision of the university, myself, the parents of the other boys, the boys. It was just considered too risky for them to stay in the Santa Cruz community and make the identification. So it was almost like witness protection program.
Yeah, it sounds that way.
Yeah, I mean, they were their identities and their transfers were kept sort of off the record, and that's how he ended up in Los Angeles, where he was very happy and he prospered academically. He went there in the spring of 2002. He ultimately joined a fraternity. He had lots of friends. Will was a very social, fun-loving young man, very respected.
He had the world at his fingertips.
World at his fingertips. He had never been in any trouble in his life. He had stood up for his friends. And then in September of 2004, as he was commencing his senior year at UCLA.
So he had been here about 2 years.
Yeah, been a little over 2 years. I received a telephone call from him, and he was just really hysterical. And this was early September, and he'd been visited by two campus police officers. And it was very difficult for me to extract from him exactly what had taken place, but after talking to him for a while, and then he gave me the name of one of the officers who I contacted, it turned out that a complaint had been filed with the university alleging that he was guilty of sexual assault. And so I called a police officer. I talked to him for a while, and I said, well, what exactly do you mean? Now, I'm an attorney, as you know, but I don't do criminal work, and I wanted to know specifically what was being involved. And the officer told me it was a rape allegation. And so then I asked him, I said, well, when did this occur? He said, well, in June. And first thing I thought to myself is, if a rape takes place in June, the police don't show up
3 months later.
3 months later. There's something wrong with this situation. I became involved. I made inquiries. I talked to the university, and I found out that he was subject to campus disciplinary policy, which set up a process of levels of interviews and then potential hearings and things of that nature. So I asked, and we'll hear from later, a good friend of mine, Bill Ginsberg, an attorney in the Los Angeles area with many years of experience. I asked Bill to intercede on Will's behalf and represent him. This led to the most awful, tragic period of time from September on. The university ultimately referred the matter in, I think, late October, early November to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office.
For prosecution.
For prosecution. This was not the decision of the police officers. This was the decision of the administration of UCLA. I had by that time obtained the statement that the alleged victim had given to this, I call him the junior dean. And I could see immediately by looking at it that it was not a credible statement.
It had a lot of inconsistencies.
Terrible inconsistencies, and I even wrote a letter pointing this out to them to say, that here is a statement which it practically falls apart, just by looking at it, and this is a person who hasn't even been subject to questioning yet at this point.
What were some of those inconsistencies?
It was the way it was written. I mean, to give you, I think, one of the most obvious examples. First of all, in the statement, she said she wasn't. What had happened is Will had met this young woman at a party the week before, back in late May, early June. A week later, he called her up. She invited him to her dormitory room. They shared some alcohol, which, by the way, even though UCLA absolutely forbids the use of alcohol, the use in the dorms and around the campus is rampant.
Of course.
So, I mean, they enforce what they want to enforce. These are two young kids, both the age of consent, and they're in a dorm room. They end up what we used to call making out or fooling around. Sex did not occur. There was no allegation of that. In fact, this young woman was before that night and after that night what we call a fully intact virgin. But they did engage in sexual conduct. She made no objections. She didn't ask for help. One of the most, and this was what later was proved to be very inconsistent, she actually, during the time he was there, left the room, spoke to some of her friends in the hall, and went back into the room to rejoin with my son.
Yeah.
This was, as it later turned out, after the alleged offense.
Right. From my understanding, when I read the report, both of them were either partially or fully unclothed.
That's true.
The girl put her clothes on, went outside, and conversed with one of her friends.
Yes.
Her friend at that time made the statement that maybe she had been raped or something.
No,
not at that time.
Not at that time.
And she and then the same girl went back into the room, took her clothes off again, and got in bed with Will again.
That's right. And again, as it later turned out, in the time frame, this was allegedly after the so-called assault. In fact, if it wasn't so tragic, the point is that she ultimately was asked, when she first claimed she had been assaulted, and her answer was, "I never claimed I was assaulted. It was explained to me that I was assaulted."
Explained by her friend.
Her friend.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that later. But what happened is that Will, during the time in September and October, became convinced in his own mind. He was scared to death. He thought that at any second somebody was going to come and arrest him. He had no idea what was going on. The pressure on him was such that he ultimately decided to leave UCLA. He couldn't stand to be physically on the campus.
So he withdrew.
He withdrew. He came back to our home in the Sacramento area. Right before Christmas, the district attorney's office did what I believed they would do. They declined to prosecute. They said there's no case here.
No credibility.
No credibility, and they let it. They rejected it.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question, and I think Bill, when he comes in here in a minute, can better answer this. During this time that the district attorney is investigating the alleged crime, the university is also conducting hearings.
No, the hearings. They agreed, I believe Bill will confirm this, they agreed to postpone their hearings until after the district attorney had made a decision.
So in December, the district attorney decided not to prosecute.
Says we're not going to do anything.
Should be a done issue then, right?
In my opinion, yes, because this is this is not a student disciplinary issue.
Right.
This is an allegation of actually a felonious offense.
Right, criminal nature.
Criminal nature, for which we have a criminal justice system that
Right.
takes care of those matters.
Let me bring in right now Bill Ginsburg, who represented your son in this matter, so he can explain the intricacies and the problems that happened in this case, okay?
Thank you.
I am very pleased to have with us Bill Ginsburg. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Bill, you represented Will in this matter, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Especially with the UCLA, and where we stopped before you came in was the district attorney they chose not to prosecute Will because they thought this wasn't a credible matter. What happened at UCLA after that?
UCLA felt that under federal law they had an in loco parentis, or a parental obligation, to police the activities of students on their campus and to distinguish who was acting appropriately and inappropriately, and mete out discipline in their manner if they felt it was appropriate.
Now, Will had left the university by this time, hadn't he?
Will was still enrolled at UCLA, if that's your question, and he was a member of a fraternity on campus and
Right.
actively involved when this started. In the course of this procedure, he left the university and enrolled at the University of the Pacific, a fine university in Northern California.
So come December 2004, the district attorney's office decides not to prosecute, and UCLA administration picks up after that, right?
That's correct.
And what happened?
They convened under the authority and color of their particular rules and regulations a panel led by a prominent law professor with members of the faculty as a tribunal, if you will, and a professorial or administrative prosecutor, and they proceeded to present evidence which was going to be the basis of a decision made by the judges.
Yeah, here's what I don't understand. The district attorney has a lot more power, and if it's a serious crime, if they chose not to prosecute it, why is UCLA even bothering with this right now?
Because UCLA felt that it had an obligation under a federal statute that they felt forced them to police the values, standards, the boundaries of students and how they reacted to them.
But Will, in December, is no longer attending the University of California, right?
That's correct, and that was a major point that we raised. He was no longer attending. The matter was moot, and why would they proceed with it? They felt an obligation to proceed with it, almost punitively, and to the day I die, I will never understand why they proceeded with that, because I think that was a major factor in Will's ultimate breakdown, and I honestly believe that there's a strong medicine here, but I honestly believe this proceeding was the precipitation or the precipiter of Will's death.
You had mentioned that right prior to his passing, that he had broke down. This was months after, wasn't it?
Well, the hearings persisted. They drew out, they were interminably long. I forget which month the first hearing date was. It was probably in February.
Let me interrupt you here for a second. Will is not at any of these hearings.
Yes, he is.
He is.
Yeah.
But he is not allowed to have counsel there.
No, he had counsel. Bill Ginsburg was
Okay.
counsel.
Not allowed to have a reporter, which we requested and they refused.
Okay.
We wanted to record with a court reporter all of the proceedings because we felt that there may have been grounds to bring this to the public's attention, as we're doing here today.
Yeah.
And we thought that reporter would be important.
Why?
They pushed the reporter out of the room, indicated it. I'll tell you why. It wasn't a public proceeding. It was Star Chamber, and that was one of our major objections, that this was a trumped-up kangaroo-type court that made no sense, but put great pressure on these young people who are exposed to it.
So he has to come back down for these hearings. How many were there?
I believe there were 3, and we had one final for closing argument scheduled. And I could be wrong on that, but that's my best memory.
There were 2. There was one witness left. That was going to be, as I recall, the nurse or something that they had. The woman had gone and had a rape kit, which was entirely negative, and so they delayed us so that the woman could explain that the rape kit was negative.
And we had agreed that she would appear by telephone. She didn't have to appear by a person.
Still, it's hard to understand. The prosecutor decides not to prosecute. The rape kit turns out negative, and UCLA still goes on its merry way.
Oh, look, Steve, it goes further than that. The question is really, in my mind, the following. And notwithstanding federal law and what UCLA believed their obligation was under federal law, the universities break down the boundaries. They allow co-ed dormitories, co-ed showers, co-ed. And then they come back and they complain that the boundaries are being violated. And they try to define them and redefine them for these kids who are doing no more, frankly, than all of us did when we were in college. It's a time of growth, a time of experimentation, a time of budding romance.
What did you notice as the months went on of Will's ability to handle this stress?
I always assumed, because he's a client and a young man at that he was under tremendous stress, and he continuously expressed it.
What would he say?
Well, he would just be concerned. What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? I didn't do anything. Didn't do anything wrong, and I kept reassuring him he didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But like all clients, frankly,
Right.
and Will was no exception, they continue to worry throughout their case because they don't see it from the perspective of outsiders like you and me.
What was your opinion of the girl making the allegations to begin with?
Well, I don't personalize these things, so it's not a question of my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion of the case and her in that context was that she was like all young ladies who perhaps have second guessing or questions about whether or not their conduct was appropriate. She was in a state of regret for having had a quasi-sexual relationship with a young man, and she was going to make sure that God and everyone else involved forgave her, and this was her method of vindication in my mind.
Will, what was the last conversation you had with Will?
Not to worry, and that this was going to be over and we were going to win, and we had established that she had absolutely no damages, that there was no quote-unquote rape at all. As a matter of fact, Steve, this young lady was texting her friends while she was engaged with Will, left the room at the request and cajoling of her friends, then came back in and said, "It's all right, I'll take care of it, it's not a problem." And yet she was still complaining. So my last conversation was, don't worry, the evidence is all favorable.
I understand that after Will passed, you got a phone call from one of the UCLA police detectives, was it?
Yeah, the detective who was in charge of the case, he was the only person that contacted me. He left me a message expressing his condolences on my cell phone.
Right.
You know,
Now,
other than that, no one talked to me.
I understand, and I saw the letters that both of you wrote to the president of the university, the chancellor, and to the head of the Board of Regents. What was the response from these people?
Well, in my case, I got a bureaucratic response, which basically no response whatsoever. As a matter of fact, we asked for, they tape recorded the hearings, and we wanted copies of those for our purposes, and then we were refused.
How did the hearings eventually end?
Well, they didn't end. We never did get a chance to put on that last witness who would have been favorable and give what would have been called a closing argument in any other context. So the hearings ended with a final hearing being scheduled, and we were scheduled to have that hearing in May or whatever the date was, and we would be done, and I was sure we would win.
And what happened is they simply abandoned it. By that time, there had been substantial evidence that Bill in particular brought out at the hearing. I'll give you one dramatic example. It's clear to me that at the urging of the university in November of 2004, the young woman went for counseling for the first time. You've got to remember this happened in June. And Bill was presented without any warning at the first hearing a report from a psychologist who said the young woman had post-traumatic stress disorder. She testified that as a result of the trauma suffered, that in the time frame after the incident in June, so June, July, August, September, in that time frame, she remained housebound, depressed, didn't go out, didn't socialize, very, very bad state of mind. It was at that point in time that Bill produced her Facebook.
Which kind of contradicted that, didn't it?
Well, she and her friend had spent the summer partying in Australia and made it very abundantly clear by very sexually, I won't say explicit, but suggestive photographs and by commentary that she and her girlfriend, who I believe was part of the instigation of this, had a very productive, happy-go-lucky summer, in direct contradiction to her testimony of being this depressed, saddened, housebound individual.
You presented that? at the
Well,
hearing?
and to say it another way, she was never inappropriately dressed, but she was provocative in her pictures, and her speaking about the young men and socialization that she enjoyed in Australia, which is hardly housebound, were in the superlatives, using all sorts of language that I guess is appropriate now for young people, but all superlatives.
All those four-letter words.
Four-letter words, but
Yeah.
all in superlatives.
Yeah.
Right.
As a result of this entire unfortunate incident, what would you like to see changed in terms at UCLA and the way they handle these matters? What would you like to see changed?
Well, the hearings have to stop. They should be legislatively banned, number one.
Is anybody interested in doing that?
I don't know. I would think that any intelligent person would be, because any person who remembers their own college years knows that that's a time of great pressure. This
Yeah.
is not something that's constructive at all. We have a police department. We have other enforcement agencies. Let them do the investigating and the prosecuting if that's appropriate. We also have civil courts and juries. Let them handle these things.
Right.
The university has no business in this area. Number two, I would like to see the universities begin to create boundaries again. And that's a liberal comment, not a conservative comment.
Sure.
I think it's appropriate in university to learn boundaries. You don't tear down boundaries and then prosecute people
Right.
from the university point of view for violating boundaries that the kids didn't know existed.
This is a tragic story. I'd like to see these things change too, because it seems like they have totally ignored, the university has totally ignored what, as you have said, Bill, law enforcement's job is supposed to do, and their results too.
What they really have ignored is that we are dealing with young people in formation. What they really have ignored is the maturation process that these kids are going through. What they really have ignored is that kids have to be able to expand.
Yes.
And what they really have ignored is that you define the rules, but you don't redefine them ex post facto, which is what's happening here. Because boundaries torn down and then boundaries redefined does not make for a good prosecution.
Yes. Well, thank you very much
My
for being on
pleasure.
the show, and thank you for helping Will.
Thank you.
My sincere condolences to you
Thank you, Steve.
as a father, and it's just a human being. And I'm glad we were able to do this tribute to Will.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.tv. Come back again.